Good morning, members. I now call the meeting to order since we have already formed a quorum. So this is the second meeting of the Bills Committee on Inland Revenue Amendment Number 2, Bill 2017. First of all, we'll be receiving deputations. So first of all, let's invite the deputations and the government officials to join us.
唔緊要啦，唔緊要，我用英文教就得啦，全部。呢度開始先噶嘛，司長嘛。係冇乜嘢唔可以俾人聽到噶嘛，係咪？我好奇怪點解佢而家有兩支咪嘅，逢親做主席位都喺啲 conference room。哇！不過我都喺度，有咩問題嗰度真係嗰個 steps。你唔係 disable 嘛？問題就係。OK。政府。佢哋應該都夠時間俾個回覆啦，係嘛？我都希望5月2號佢哋有晒啲。Good morning. Welcome to the second meeting of the 2017 Inland Revenue Amendment Number 2 Bill Committee. Just for clarification, I'll just do a very brief introduction in English, but the rest of the meeting will be conducted in Cantonese. And if you have your headset with you, channel number 0 will be the live broadcast. Channel number 1 will be Cantonese channel. Channel number 2 will be the English channel. We have simultaneous interpretation for English in channel number 2. And we have the Putonghua translation, simultaneous translation in channel number 3. So if anyone who does not understand any languages, you can just put up the headphone and ask our concierge to assist you if you want. 好，另外咧，我要提醒各位。
Next, I would like to remind those who are in attendance, other than LegCo members as well as specified public officers in attendance, for those attending today's meeting, your oral presentations and your written submissions will not be safeguarded by the Legislative Council Powers and Privileges Ordinance. Moreover, I would like to draw your attention to the following. That is the note for the members of the public attending meetings in conference rooms or observing meetings in public galleries in the LegCo complex, which contains the various security measures. That note has already been attached to the letter sent to you by the Secretariat. It has also been tabled. And for those members in the public galleries, you may also want to get a copy from the security guards. But I don't see anybody in the public gallery. Now I would like to give the floor to the deputations. You can speak one by one. It is highly technical. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes each. When you speak, all you have to do is to highlight the main points in your submission. There's no need to repeat your submission in total. This is because members of the committee have the opportunity to read your written submission. According to our usual practice, the Bills Committee will upload the written submission from you onto our website. It has also been sent out to members of this Bills Committee. If you haven't got a written submission, or if you would like to supplement to your written submission, you're welcome to give us a copy after the meeting. In addition, when you speak, you may choose to speak in Cantonese or English, but please do not have a mixed code so as to facilitate interpreters. First of all, I would like to invite Mr. William Ho. You have 5 minutes to speak. Thank you, Chair. Well, the aviation industry is growing rapidly. Airlines have to expand and upgrade and update their fleet. Aircraft are very expensive. Well, in fact, aircraft leasing companies' service is also welcome. Singapore and Ireland are the major centers for aircraft leasing. In particular, for Ireland, the major international aircraft lessors have set up a base in Ireland so as to run the business. According to the experience there, aircraft leasing has brought about high-quality jobs and has also facilitated developments in legal, accounting, and other professional fields. It has been benefiting. For Hong Kong, about 30 years ago, we did change the revenue laws so as to successfully deal with the leveraged leasing business in the aviation industry, but has also left behind some impediments restricting the growth of such a business in Hong Kong. For this bill, now what it achieves to do is that for cross-boundary aircraft leasing arrangements, there will be a tax concession so as to break the shackles that we have inherited. It means that we are going to have a competitive environment for aircraft leasing. The market has anticipated for the next 20 years for the demand for passenger aviation capacity, there will be rapid growth. For the airlines, they will have a very keen demand for aircraft. In the global sector, there will be a very rapid growth in the business. This bill will provide a sound and appropriate setting for the development of aircraft leasing in Hong Kong. It means that we can grab the opportunities and will benefit our economy. We support the bill. Thank you. Thank you. Next, Ms. Carrie Liu from Baker & McKenzie.
Baker McKenzie, we are supportive of this Inland Revenue Amendment number 2 bill as well, and we also believe it does help to remove the tax impediments that the current regime has in attracting Hong Kong to a more palatable, commercially palatable commercial aircraft leasing hub for international players, especially for leasing company looking to base in Ireland and Singapore. So we've done a comparison with other regimes, and we also think, just based on feedback we have from clients, that the changes that we are presenting for the industry players are actually very attractive commercially. There are a few minor issues that we want to raise about the bills. Most of these we actually have the benefit of looking at the written submissions that made by other parties that are presented at this meeting. And a lot of our submissions, in terms of our comments, are pretty much aligned with those that are presented in the written submissions. The one that we want to raise in particular is the definition of non-Hong Kong aircraft operators. We do concur with other submitters in terms of we need to look at the definition. At the moment, it does say it only applies to aircraft operators that are not accessible for tax in Hong Kong under our domestic rules. We agree that you probably do need to look into expanding it to where tax exemptions provided under a treaty. The other comments that were also raised by other submitters are whether or not, at the moment, the regime only applies when the aircraft lessor is leasing to an operating lessee, whether or not there is a need to distinguish between what you called, under legislation, a funding lease versus an operating lease. Other regimes, such as Singapore and Ireland, they don't have that distinction between the two. Whether or not there is a need for that for the Hong Kong regime, we do question that. The other one is, again, linked to funding lease. If we were to pursue the line that we were to exclude funding lease, currently Section 14I3A, it provides that the aircraft lessor must incur capital expenditure on provision of the aircraft lease, whether or not capital expenditure would also include expenses incurred under a funding lease. That point is not clear whether or not we might have clarification on that. The other point, probably one minor one, just on, at the moment the regime doesn't have any grace period. And some of these submitters also commented on the condition about the control and management exercise in Hong Kong, whether or not for a new leasing platform that just established in Hong Kong, how easy it is to have that management in Hong Kong, and also not having a PE outside of Hong Kong. Again, whether or not you might want to think about maybe having a grace period that would allow people to transition into the regime or before they get used to how it actually operates. And finally, just on Section 14I3A, at the moment there is, so that provision allows for the 80% deemed deduction. And there are a number of conditions that needs to be satisfied. One of them is the aircraft must not have been claimed capital allowance by a connected person. Again, we're wondering if you would, whether or not that condition needs to be applied, because from our perspective, it probably would be an issue if you've got a connected parties arrangement where the aircraft is leased at below, say, the market value. But if the transaction actually occurred at market value of the aircraft, whether or not there is still that sort of exclusion, because it's an absolute exclusion. Once the aircraft has been had capital allowance claimed by a connected person previously, you would not be allowed that to come within the regime at all, and you would effectively be subject to 8.25% tax rate instead of the lower concession. Again, whether or not there might be any room for considering for this condition not to be imposed where aircraft is transferred at arm's length value. That's it.
Okay, thank you. 下一位係英國。
Next, we have Ms. Ho Yun Man from the Allen & Overy. As a participant in the industry, I have witnessed the development of the aircraft leasing industry. Whether for a company to hold an aircraft by way of a lease or the setting up of a company or transactions involving aircraft lessors, all these have been growing, especially in the mainland market. The aircraft leasing industry there's a lot of demand for financing and so on, and the acquisition of assets, insurance and all such transactions can stimulate the development of the industry and enhance Hong Kong's status as an international financial center. The amendment of the ordinance will render the tax environment more attractive for the aircraft lessors and putting us on par with the two other major aircraft leasing jurisdictions, and Hong Kong could become an international center for aircraft leasing. And we support the proposed amendments. Next, Ms. Anita Zhang from the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants.
ACCA, we would like to express our support for the government's initiative of introducing a concessionary tax regime for the aircraft leasing industry in Hong Kong. We believe that such regime would help attract more aircraft leasing and management business to Hong Kong. As for the details of the regime, we would like to seek the government's view or clarification on the following 3 points. Some of these points may have already mentioned by the other representatives. Firstly, based on the current definition of non-Hong Kong aircraft operator in the bill, it appears that if a qualifying Hong Kong aircraft lessor leases aircraft to an overseas airline that has flights flying to Hong Kong for uplift of passengers or goods, the leasing transaction concerned will not be covered by the regime because the overseas airline will be chargeable to profits tax under the Inland Revenue Ordinance and therefore not being regarded as a non-Hong Kong aircraft operator. In this regard, we will appreciate if the government can clarify whether this is the legislative intent. And also in the case where the overseas airline is exempt from profits tax under the applicable Hong Kong tax treaty, will it be regarded as not being not chargeable to profits tax and thus qualifying as a non-Hong Kong aircraft operator? Secondly, under the current bill, one of the conditions to qualify for the regime is that the lessee must be an aircraft operator. As we understand that in some cases and for commercial reasons, an aircraft lessor may lease aircraft to a special purpose vehicle set up within an overseas airline group, and then for this special purpose vehicle to sublease the aircraft to the aircraft operator within the same airline group. We would like to seek the government's view on whether, in the above situation, it will look at the overseas airline group as a whole and treat aircraft as being leased to an aircraft operator. Finally, we recommended that a departmental interpretation and practice note be issued by the Inland Revenue Department to set out its views on the interpretation and application of the various key provisions of the regime, including the 2 points mentioned above, so as to provide greater certainty and clarity to taxpayers. We believe doing so will also enhance the transparency of the regime. That's all for ACCA submission. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Zhang. The next one will be Mr. Hui Hon-jung, the President of Hong Kong Aircraft Leasing and Aviation Finance Association.
好多謝主席，我係代表香港飛機租賃同埋航空呢個融資協會就呢個
So I speak on behalf of the association to make our submissions on the 2017 Inland Revenue Amendment Bill. According to the prediction of the aircraft manufacturers, and this is agreed by the aircraft industry, which is that for the next 20 years, there will be close to 40,000 aircrafts to be delivered in the next 20 years, amounting to 6,000 billion US dollars. The major growth market will be the Asian Pacific region, the most important of which was the mainland of China, where the expansion of the aircraft industry is at 6% per annum. In recent years, there is a trend for airline companies to switch from buying aircrafts to leasing aircrafts. In fact, that ratio used to be 0, but now about 40%, and it's predicted it will go up to 50%. In the mainland, a document was circulated earlier, proposing that we should expand the development of the aircraft leasing industry in the free trade areas in Tianjin, Shanghai, and Shanghai. the indication is that the aircraft leasing industry is developing very rapidly. Throughout the world, the major aircraft leasing centers are Ireland and to some extent Singapore, with Singapore leading the world. For the aircraft leasing industry, they have provided very, attractive policies, and they are actually the iconic, system. According to the current tax regime, for those engaged in the aircraft leasing business, they would need to pay more than double the 16.5% profits tax. Under the current tax regime, we are not allowed to claim for depreciation as one of the means to reduce cost. Obviously, the tax rate is higher than other jurisdictions. At the moment, the aircraft leasing industry doesn't exist. In Hong Kong, we know that next to Hong Kong, there's a huge market, which is the mainland of China. Hong Kong being an international financial, aviation, and logistics center, we have very sound financing, superstructure. We have a good tax regime. We have the professional experts and a sound legal system. We should have all the prerequisites become an international aircraft leasing, hub for. So, as the trade association, we believe that the bill is necessary to facilitate the development of the industry. Under the new proposed tax regime, tax liability of the aircraft leasing companies will be drastically aligned to those of other jurisdictions, and Hong Kong will be more attractive to international aircraft leasing companies to come and set up the business here. Of course, we hope that this business would need the government to provide policy support, especially the expansion and enhancement of the treaty on the avoidance of double taxation with other jurisdictions. The aircraft leasing business will directly and indirectly create a large number of high-value jobs and at the same time contribute the development of banking, finance, legal, and other industries, promoting overall economic development and enhancing Hong Kong's status as a major international financial and aviation center. Therefore, the association believes that the bill and the ASEAN government policy support for the aircraft leasing industry will make international aircraft leasing companies to seriously consider coming here and set up base in Hong Kong to develop the business. Therefore, our association fully supports the bill. Thank you.
Leung Kai-Fai from PricewaterhouseCoopers Limited. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. PwC welcomes the opportunity to comment on the Captain Bill to create a dedicated tax regime to attract aircraft lessors to come to Hong Kong. PwC is totally supportive of this bill, and we will echo the Hong Kong government's observation of the potential demand of new aircraft in the mainland China in the next 20 years, which is estimated to be approximately US 760 million, which is a large sum of money. Given Hong Kong's unique position to China, its prominent role as a business hub in the region, sophisticated financial markets, and well-developed legal system, international aircraft lessor has been looking to develop an Asian base to serve their Asian customers. So for those lessors who wants to set up a base in Asia, they are looking at Hong Kong. However, under the current tax law in Hong Kong, as commented by some other representatives in this meeting today, the effective tax rate under the current rules for carrying aircraft leasing business in Hong Kong is well over 30%, as compared to the Hong Kong standard rate of profit tax, 16.5%, which in my opinion is unreasonable and unjustifiable. Hence, we welcome the Hong Kong government's recent decisions to actually amend the Hong Kong tax rules in order to attract this type of business to establish their leasing business activities in Hong Kong. This will not only help Hong Kong maintain its competitiveness as Asia's key transportation and business hub, but also strengthen its positions as a major international financial center. I would also actually like to comment. I actually thought the proposed tax regime by the Hong Kong government is very innovative, and noted under the new rules, the effective tax rate for aircraft lessor to carry on leasing business in Hong Kong would be far lower than our major competitors in the other region. The effect of actually paying a little bit of tax as compared to defer the tax payment in the future years, in my own opinion, is a welcome move when taking into account the latest developments, the base erosion and profit shifting led by the OECD initiative. We would like to comment that any such revisions of tax rules should not result in any tax losses to Hong Kong, and developing Hong Kong into an aircraft leasing, financing and investment center should not require any Hong Kong government subsidy. As commented by other representatives today, at the moment, there's no aircraft leasing business in Hong Kong. According to a research paper entitled Aviation Leasing, Leverage Hong Kong's Strength, published by PwC Hong Kong in 2017, we actually estimated if Hong Kong decided to turn into an aviation leasing hub, we believe in the next 20 years, it can be over 3,000 aircraft with a value of approximately 91 billion based on the new aircraft required globally from the aircraft manufacturer. Hence, we believe the establishment of Hong Kong as an important aircraft leasing center will therefore help to promote and consolidate Hong Kong's position as a global business and financial center, and most importantly, I think, is to create jobs for the future generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leung. The next speaker will be Mr. Calver from Deloitte Advisory Hong Kong Limited. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Deloitte's key technical points have already been made by other speakers. Our technical points have also been included in our written submission. I would like to use this time to emphasise the importance of rectifying the drafting issues which have been identified. In the last few years, Hong Kong has introduced a number of pieces of legislation to incentivise activities to be undertaken from Hong Kong and to improve Hong Kong's economic position and its standing as a global financial centre, including measures to attract Islamic finance, corporate treasury activity, and the issuance of deductible additional Tier 1 capital for financial institutions. The policy intention behind each of these changes has been sound, and these are policy changes which other jurisdictions have successfully implemented in the past. However, in each of these cases, the legislation introduced has not had the effect intended and has not resulted in significant increased activity in Hong Kong. Tax legislation may not be the only factor to consider. However, the tax legislation introduced in each case has been onerous to comply with and lacking certainty, despite a reasonable amount of complexity. Incentive legislation which is onerous to comply with is unlikely to attract a multinational to relocate their activities to Hong Kong, particularly when they are likely to already locate their activities in a jurisdiction offering favourable tax treatment. In addition, uncertainty within the legislation also discourages multinationals. While a reasonable degree of uncertainty is acceptable, legislation must be drafted to provide sufficient certainty such that core policy objectives are met without it being necessary for the Inland Revenue Department to issue guidance notes in order to provide comfort to the industry on how legislation will work in practice. Doing so puts the Inland Revenue Department in the difficult position of balancing their objectives of protecting the tax base with interpreting legislation in a manner which will allow taxpayers to take advantage of intended incentives. Perhaps unsurprisingly, tax professionals and industry participants often comment that IRD guidance is often skewed towards protecting the tax base. While IRD guidance is not binding, when there are significant areas of uncertainty or the legislation provides for the Commissioner to provide their view, as is the case in the bill, taxpayers give significant weight to this guidance. The combination of onerous and uncertain legislation discourages companies from relocating their activities to Hong Kong. At a time when the UK has consistently reduced its corporate tax rate, the US is contemplating a corporate tax rate cut to 15% or 20%, and Singapore already offers low tax rates and a raft of incentives. Companies have other options, and Hong Kong is in the position of having to compete. Due to this unprecedented tax competition, it is important that legislation should be drafted in a manner which is easy to comply with and provides certainty in order to give rise to the underlying policy intent. Based on the current drafting of the bill, it does not appear this is the case. Several examples have been outlined in our written submission and touched on by other committee members here. In particular, the definition of non-Hong Kong aircraft operator in combination with Section 23D of the IRO appears to prevent an aircraft operator which lands in Hong Kong from being a lessee within the meaning of the bill. This is even after applying applicable treaties to exempt the non-Hong Kong aircraft operator from the payment of tax. In addition, the definition of lease in the bill appears to exclude certain finance leases which have the option to transfer aircraft during the period of the lease, unless in the Commissioner's view it is reasonable to consider this option may not be exercised. While the majority of aircraft leases are operating leases, it is not necessary to narrow the application of this bill in this manner. I would refer the committee to the Deloitte written submission for further technical issues. While there appear to be drafting issues with the bill, we believe the overall policy measures intended by the bill should sufficiently improve Hong Kong's position as an aircraft leasing centre, in particular with regard to China. We are supportive of the bill, provided drafting issues can be rectified. Thank you.
Thank you. And will be Mr. Jeremy Choi from the Taxation Institute of Hong Kong.
Thank you, Chairman. The TIHK support the government initiative to introduce a tax regime to promote aircraft leasing and financing industry. We believe the proposed regime should enhance our tax competitiveness and should be implemented as soon as possible. However, we do have some recommendations as set out in our paper, and some of which has been mentioned by the previous speaker. Number one is the definition of non-Hong Kong aircraft operator. Under the proposed legislations, a non-Hong Kong aircraft operator is defined to mean an aircraft operator who is not chargeable to profit tax under the ordinance. However, many overseas aircraft operators would have some of their aircraft flying to Hong Kong to uplift passengers and goods. Such overseas aircraft operator would likely be chargeable to profit tax in Hong Kong as a non-resident under the current legislation. As such, they are technically chargeable to profit tax under the IRO, even though they may be exempted under the treaty or service agreements. Now, as such, we prefer to suggest the legislation to make it clear that the condition of not chargeable to profit tax under the ordinance would be satisfied, where profits are subsequently exempt under the treaty. The second point we want to make is based on the current definition of funding lease and lease in the proposed legislation. It would appear that the Hong Kong qualifying aircraft lessor who enter into finance lease arrangement or hire purchase agreement with non-Hong Kong aircraft operator will not be eligible for the tax treatment under the concessionary tax regime. Well, unless the Commissioner is in the opinion that the aircraft concerned would reasonably be expected not to pass to the lessee. Now, as such, finance lease arrangements are not uncommon in the aircraft leasing and financing industry. We would like to urge the government to consider expanding the scope of concessionary tax regime to cover finance lease arrangement and hire purchase arrangement as well, in particular as both tax regime in Ireland and Singapore do not distinguish them. Finally, we also recommend the government to issue DIPN notes to set out clearly the points of this legislation afterwards. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Choi. And the next speaker will be Mr. Edward Lin from the Hong Kong Institute of Certified Public Accountants.
Good morning. Firstly, the Institute would like to thank the Chairman and the Committee for inviting us to make representations. The Institute fully supports the introduction of a tax concession for aircraft leasing and related services. As shown in the Government's briefings to LegCo, there is expected to be a strong growth in the demand for aircraft fleet size over the coming decades, particularly in the mainland, and Hong Kong should be positioning itself to take advantage of all that additional financing activity. However, as we describe in our written submission, the bill as drafted has some serious deficiencies, many of which have been alluded to by the other representatives. I would suggest that these deficiencies should be corrected in the statute, in the legislation itself, rather than relying on non-binding extra statutory guidance from the Inland Revenue. The first and most significant issue with the drafting relates to who can qualify as an aircraft lessor under the tax concession, which has been raised by almost all of the professional representatives here. The concession only applies to qualifying leasing activities, which only include leasing to a non-Hong Kong aircraft operator, and that's defined as one that is not chargeable to profits tax. The issue is that Section 23 Big D of the Inland Revenue Ordinance deems non-Hong Kong resident aircraft operators to be carrying on business in Hong Kong and therefore to be chargeable to profits tax if they land any aircraft at a Hong Kong airport. This would seem to exclude most international airlines and many mainland airlines, as surely they all land in Hong Kong occasionally, and limits the usefulness of both the tax concession for aircraft leasing, but also the aircraft leasing management tax concession, which is for providing services to qualifying aircraft lessors. On this basis, we recommend changing the drafting of the bill to exclude leasing to aircraft operators that are actually subject to profits tax on the profits from their air carriage activities. There are also a number of issues with the aircraft leasing manager tax concession. To qualify, the aircraft leasing manager must be providing qualifying activities to a qualifying aircraft lessor. However, some of the list of aircraft leasing management activities in proposed Schedule 17 can never satisfy this requirement. For example, if you look at 1K, which is the activity of providing finance in obtaining the ownership of an aircraft by an airline enterprise from another corporation that is a relevant qualifying aircraft lessor. That's a specific example where you can never satisfy that exemption because an airline can never be a qualifying aircraft lessor, and therefore you can't provide that activity to a qualifying aircraft lessor and obtain the tax concession. Furthermore, the other listed activities in relation to airline leasing management seem to be overly restricted. So, for example, 1C and D are to do with providing finance to qualifying aircraft lessors, but only apply if the person providing the finance owns the leasing SPV. What we suggest would be better is if you're incentivising all financing of Hong Kong qualifying lessors rather than just ones that own leasing SPVs. Another issue is to do with an anti-avoidance provision in the bill that requires that the relevant company claiming the tax concession is centrally managed and controlled in Hong Kong. We suspect this is so that the company has sufficient substance in Hong Kong and the regime isn't seen as abusive. However, that discriminates against non-Hong Kong resident companies, for example, foreign companies operating through a Hong Kong branch, and that's specifically prohibited under the non-discrimination articles of Hong Kong's tax treaties with a number of other jurisdictions. So we suggest that that be altered or removed. Finally, and again a lot of the representatives have mentioned this, the definition of lease in the proposed legislation is cumbersome and overly restrictive. The existing definition of lease in the Inland Revenue Ordinance already excludes hire purchase agreements where the ownership of the asset may pass to the lessee. So it's not clear why a wholly new definition is required for this legislation. But in any case, we would suggest that it shouldn't be restricted to leases where ownership of the aircraft doesn't pass to the lessee. There appear to be no mischief that's being addressed by this, and it will limit commercial leasing arrangement. we hope the Bills Committee will seek amendment of the bill so that it achieves its purpose.
好，夠鐘啦，唔好意思啊。
Your time is up. I'm sorry about that. We've listened to all the deputations, whether in writing or orally. I hope the administration later on will give a written reply. But at this moment, I would like to give the floor to the officials so that we get an initial reply, and then I'll open the floor to members for questions to be directed at the deputations. Mr. Lau, please. Thank you. Through you, Chairman, I would like to thank the various deputations who are in attendance. We are glad to hear that you are in support of the bill. We also agree that this bill, when enacted, can greatly enhance Hong Kong's attractiveness as a hub for aircraft leasing. As to the specific views that you have expressed concerning the details of the bill, Chair, if you permit, I would like to invite Mr. Chiu, the Deputy Commissioner, to give a reply on the various points. Yes, Mr. Chiu, please. Thank you, Chair. Regarding the comments made by the various deputations, we do welcome the views expressed. In fact, they have highlighted the legislative intention on the part of the administration. Say, for example, many of them have talked about the case of non-Hong Kong aircraft operator and whether that definition would cover those not chargeable to Hong Kong profits tax as a result of the taxation agreements. We have used the term chargeable in the English addition because the latest word used in our IRO is chargeable instead of taxable. Therefore, if we have got an overseas aircraft operator under the DTA, if it is not chargeable, then it will be regarded as not chargeable to Hong Kong profits tax. And in other words, it will be covered. Currently, we have already got 37 taxation agreements. We have also got a few other air services agreements. Therefore, the number of jurisdictions to be covered will be quite numerous. Well, I think basically we have heard support from the deputations. However, they have said that a lot of the details would have to be covered by the departmental interpretation and practice notes. We agree totally with them. We have read the submissions. Most of them can be taken on board. However, it takes time to make it clear. Otherwise, there will be misunderstanding or abuse.
就係話嗰個 funding lease 嗰個問題啦，因為喺稅務嗰個稅基侵蝕同埋利潤轉移咧，我哋留意到咧就國際上咧係要求咧有實體嘅業務喺香港嘅。其實所有嘅資產咧最好就喺香港一個居民企業咧就所擁有嘅。呢個擁有咧，我哋係已經係擴闊咗佢嘅。我記得主席我都曾經解釋過，我哋而家所講嘅 ownership 係
said that under the current regime, it includes funding, lease, procurement, finance, hire, purchase, and conditional sale. As far as ownership is concerned, the coverage is very wide. For the aircraft lessors to lease out the aircraft, we still maintain a lot of flexibility. So long as the title is lease out, we would accept. We hope that this can satisfy the needs of the different parties. Regarding the structuring of aircraft leasing business is rather complex. The law would require some flexibility to satisfy the needs of the industry. For such details, the IRD and the government would not object. But in the departmental interpretation and the rules, we need to stipulate them clearly so that the industry can join the regime while at the same time avoiding abuse. Chairman, at a later stage, we will prepare a formal written response to the submissions received. I will forecast that today we will not be able to complete the scrutiny of the bill, and I don't want to rush things. And I can say this to members that at our next meeting is scheduled for the 2nd of May at 9 a.m. in the morning, or 10:45 rather. That will be the date of our next meeting. I hope by then the administration will be able to give us a written response to the views points raised by the deputations, so that we have some time to study them, and that we would be able to have a detailed discussion as we scrutinize the bill clause by clause. With that, I will now open the floor to members. Dr. Kwok. First of all, I'd like to thank the deputations for coming this morning. I have heard that most of them are supportive of the bill, but I've heard Mr. Chiu made one point which I'm also very concerned about. That is the question of tax avoidance and the impact on the airline industry in Hong Kong. You may have Hong Kong people owning the aircraft, but he is owning the aircraft through an overseas company. While the contract is signed overseas, but the plane frequently flies to Hong Kong. Superficially, it would appear that he is getting all the benefits or advantages. But let us not forget that we've spent a lot of money building our airport. We are going to spend another $140 billion to build the third runway. So under such tax arrangements, shouldn't these companies pay the full amount of tax they should pay in Hong Kong? There shouldn't be a 50% deduction, except that they claim to be an overseas company, but then the planes are always flying to Hong Kong. The contract is signed overseas, but many, well, what do you call it, a base? Or anyway, most of the planes will pass through Hong Kong. So we are creating, therefore, a tax loophole here. Hong Kong is not collecting more tax revenue. In fact, we will be collecting less. We're talking about a company owned by a person in Hong Kong, but the company is registered elsewhere. Should we charge them the full amount of the tax? Mr. Chiu. I'll answer that question carefully. Under the bilateral tax agreements that we have signed, there are two versions. One is the OECD version. Under the OECD version, the right to charge tax, regarding the right to tax, right, whichever jurisdiction, I think where the company is resident in that jurisdiction, it will. So it's a bilateral agreement. That is, if my plane flies to your country, you won't charge us tax. When your plane flies to our country, we won't charge them tax either. So this is a very simple arrangement. Otherwise, it will be very complicated. Sometimes you will have to study what the laws are in the other jurisdictions. So the standard, according to the OECD, is rather stringent. For the aviation industry, for any airline companies or any corporations, more than 90% of these service agreements would be based on this model. There are very few such old agreements which doesn't adopt this model. Chairman, I don't think you've answered my question. Under such an arrangement, will Hong Kong incur a loss, and if so, how much? Mr. Chiu, I don't think there will be any losses if the other party don't charge, us the taxes for our corporation flying planes there, and so when there are more planes and more flights, it is even more beneficial for Hong Kong. Dr. Kwok. So we still have incurred the cost. You say there are more planes and more flights, But there are two costs here involved. The actual cost is the cost for building and operating the airport. We spend a lot of money on that. And secondly, every time a plane flies to Hong Kong, we are paying for the noise pollution, the cost of noise pollution and air pollution cost. Don't forget that such businesses do not incur any such cost. Making such a claim is rather dangerous. We may end up losing a lot more than we have gained. So under such an arrangement, together with the cost of building the airport and the environmental, costs that we have to incur, we may not stand to gain it in the end. I think what Mr. Kwok talked about involved a broader issue of aviation policy. On the question of cost, first of all, the construction cost for the airport is that every time a plane lands or take off from Hong Kong, the airline company has to pay a fee to the namely the landing and parking fees. So whether the plane is separate from the tax arrangement for the aircraft leasing company, whether the company is procured or leased, every time they use our airport, they have to pay a fee. So we may not therefore suffer the loss there. Regarding the invisible social costs like noise and air pollution, airline companies all over the world and ICAO also take this very seriously. So from time to time, they would issue new guidelines. For example, noise mitigating measures and guidelines regarding carbon emission. So airline companies and airports will follow all such rules, and they will adopt measures to minimize such cost. Well, I don't know whether I've answered Dr. Kwok's question. A brief follow-up. For the landing and fees, it may only reflect the operating cost, but as for the construction cost, we're talking about spending $200 billion to improve on our flight frequencies, and I believe the amount to be spent is not so small. If you have any figures, I would like you to show me those numbers. I also agree that if one takes Tung Chung for an example, the residents have to suffer from all these pollution and so on for the benefit of Hong Kong. If you're a resident in Tung Chung, you'll understand what I mean. They see that more and more planes are taking off and landing at the airport. While the government is so keen to capture these airline leasing businesses and attract more flights to come here, it's not the case that we don't have to pay a cost. And I understand that at Heathrow, for example, for certain models of airline, they would charge a different fee because such planes are not those that they welcome as that much. For the planes which are leased, they are not always small planes. Very often they are larger planes, even older planes with, have emit more, which makes more emission. And should we then charge them a higher value-added tax vis-a-vis the pollution that they have caused, so that we can help, tackle the global pollution problem? Dr. Kwok, before Mr. Lau answer the question, I'd like to refer to Dr. Kwok to CP bracket 4894/16-17/02, which has shown us the landing charge for the Hong Kong International Airport. The THP circulated this paper to us on April the 21st. Of course, this may not fully answer Dr. Kwok's question, except that it has shown you the numbers. actually the charge of $2,800, $3,000, and what actually is included under such charges, what are the direct and indirect costs, whether they've included the social costs. Perhaps Mr. Lau can further elaborate. A simple answer to Mr. Kwok's question. Of course, the lending charges, we may not be recover 100% of the costs. But when one looks at the operation of the airport, basically the airport serves the economy of Hong Kong. Although the lending and charge, we may not be able to fully recover the costs. But the airport is a major engine promoting our economic growth, and we must bear that in mind. Regarding noise, pollution, or the model of planes which fly to Hong Kong, I can simply say that the Hong Kong AA adopt many measures similar to those adopted at Heathrow. For example, we no longer allow certain models or old planes, the Chapter 3 types of planes. We will gradually, through different market initiatives and administrative measures, phase out the older models of planes and planes which are very noisy. I hope Dr. Kwok will understand that we're not working with airline companies. We're relying on technology, for example, the GPS technology, so that when the planes fly, they will follow a more correct route or alignment, so that they will not deviate from the road and therefore generate noise nuisance affecting the Ma Wan residents. Talking about noise pollution at Ma Wan, we will promise that we will take a look at this problem seriously. We have more than 10 equipments, recording the noise level. We will closely monitor the data that we have collected. I'd like to remind members that the next in turn is Mr. Jeremy Tam. Now, if you have any questions for the deputations, I think, Mr. Tam, you have a question?
First of all, thank you very much for everyone come over here this morning. Unfortunately, there's 3 meetings going on at the same time. That's why some of our committee keep coming in and out. Some of the information I may miss out. What I actually caught my attention was from Ms. Carrie Liu. When you mentioned about the capital allowance, and also I think you also mentioned about the grace period. Did the government representative, when they make the summary response, did they actually address your concern, or you would like to further talk about that particular point a bit further?
Ms. Liu, yes, your time.
Yeah, so it is just an observation that we have added to this, whether or not there might be any room for considering a grace period, because at the moment, once you lose the eligibility to become a qualifying aircraft lessor, you can't opt back into a regime. It's an absolute. So whether or not that might impact on the attractiveness of the regime, so that's one aspect to consider. And then the other one is just a minor technical point about, because one of the key things is this deduction that you get, the 80% deduction, that effectively gives you to an effective tax rate of much lower than 8.225. It comes down to about 1.65. In it does prevent, have a limitation that says if the aircraft has been, capital allowance has been claimed on the aircraft by an associate or connected person in the past, then you don't again qualify for a regime. And given some of the aircraft leasing group, there might be a situation where the aircraft do move within the group, whether or not, again, if the aircraft do transfer at arm's length value, whether or not that concern is still, a relevant concern. And we understand that there is concern about abuse of the tax regime. But again, if we were to have a more comprehensive tax concession regime, again, these might be factors to consider.
Okay, thank you. Can we have some response from the government side, please? Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Chiu.
主席，就頭先團體講出咧，就話
Just now, the deputation talked about the grace period. And then in relation to the test concerning central management and control, it is an international standard. If it is desired to have a lower withholding tax under the DTA, then what has to be done is that the central management and control has to be carried out in Hong Kong. This is an international requirement. As to the BEPS, again, it is important. This is because the requirement is that there must be substantial and substantive business in Hong Kong. When it comes to the implementation, we talk about the entire year instead of having a requirement that this has to be complied with on a daily basis. In other words, there will be a degree of flexibility. When it comes to the actual implementation, of course, we appreciate that an enterprise can't become a large enterprise on day one. So we'll take the reality into account. It depends on whether there is substantive business in Hong Kong. And then we can see whether there is central management and control in Hong Kong. We'll also issue the certificate of residence so as to benefit from the DTA. Thank you, Chair. Next, I would like to repeat that all the time I've been in full support of the amendment bill. As you know, Mr. Chairman, it is something that we are striving for. But it doesn't mean that we'll be attracting a lot more aircraft and causing ecological damage. It isn't quite like that. I support fully the introduction of the bill, but then there are also a number of technical points that have been raised by the deputations here. Many of them are professional bodies in this regard. In their submissions, they have got very clear questions asked. So perhaps at our next meeting, we should be given the information in a table form. Say, for example, making references to the specific provision in the bill, the nature of the concern, the nature of the worry, and the administration comes back with a response so that later on the deputations can check the information to see whether their concern has been addressed. If it is found that it is still an outstanding concern, I'm sure the Chair will always welcome a written correspondence from you so that you tell us about your comment on the IRD's response and whether it is reasonable, whether it is appropriate. I don't have other questions really, but I really hope that as far as this bill is concerned, we have to be very cautious. I think many members are really worried that there will be a loophole for tax avoidance or abuse. I think that is probably the major concern of many other members as to whether we can attract more businesses to come to Hong Kong to carry out this activity. I really don't worry. I don't worry whether anybody will be attracted. The answer is a very clear one. It is in the affirmative. Are you going to tabulate your response? Sure. Mr. Tam, do you have other questions for the deputations? Can I check with you? Do you have other questions? Oh, yes. Mr. Hui, President of the Hong Kong Aircraft Leasing and Aviation Finance Association. Mr. Hui, well, according to the title of your association, I am interested in this question. I want to know whether you have been approached by any entity saying that upon enactment of the bill they will come, and how many of them? A simple answer is yes. Let me call you before you give an answer. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Hui. Thank you, Chair. The simple answer is yes. We have already got ongoing business, but then of course our tax base is mainly in Ireland. Knowing that the Hong Kong government has got this new policy, we already liaise with the major international lessors, say for example ACG, GCAS, Air Lease, etc. and they have expressed a strong interest. And as other deputations have said, according to the new tax regime, we have the advantage of proximity, and we are very close to the mainland market, and we can see a clear advantage for us. Currently, for many overseas lessors, when they go to the mainland market, say for example for the cities like Shanghai, Tianjin, they found that there were many problems in relation to the access to the market. They've met with hindrances and they have reservation. Therefore, Hong Kong has got a very sound legal system. We have got many professional services. They are credible, reliable. So the common view is that if the opportunity is there in Hong Kong, they will certainly come to Hong Kong to start the business. Therefore, our members include such internationally renowned lessors. Thank you. I've got a couple of questions for the deputations. I would also like to get a reply from the administration. I think just now, was it Mr. Lin who talked about the following point?
In English, because it's better to express such technical, terms. I think Mr. Lin has mentioned about a non-discriminatory article in the model treaties, because obviously central management and control is an essential criteria in deciding whether you're going to give that lessor company in Hong Kong the tax benefits. But Mr. Lin also mentioned that, well, if the company or the group itself wants to use a branch of an overseas company rather than incorporating a company in Hong Kong, can this benefit be given to that particular company if it is a branch of an overseas company?
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a highly technical question from you, Chair. Generally speaking, under the DTAs, a jurisdiction may give special concessions to its resident entities, but at the same time, it cannot discriminate against non-resident entities, provided that there is a DTA. When it comes to the implementation, the two taxation authorities have to clarify whether there is an element of discrimination. And then both sides would have to arrive at an agreement. In our past experience, for non-tax residents, if they've got a branch in Hong Kong, on such matters we have to liaise with the controlling authority. It all depends on the domestic policies and legislation and how they compare with the counterpart in Hong Kong before we can come to a conclusion. We have noted this concern. Our mechanism is that we need to work through the mutual agreement procedure instead of giving a blanket yes or no in our answer. That cannot be achieved. Another question is directed at Mr. Leung at PricewaterhouseCoopers Limited. I think your PWH issued a report on aircraft financing, right? Yes, the 2017 report was the result of a seminar that we organized on aircraft leasing. We have invited the financial services sector to attend the seminar, and we sort of shared our views concerning how the matter was viewed by the financial services industry. James, I know you would like to ask a question, but if it is not directly related to the deputations, then I'll excuse them. We don't want to hold them here for too long. Yes, it's related to the deputations. I'm sorry for coming late. Thank you for giving us your comments. Now, for the amendment bill, well, in fact, by amending the law, we would like to be more competitive vis-a-vis our competitors. Please tell us whether there will still be some outstanding differences, and are they important enough so as to make us still not competitive vis-a-vis our competitors? Could I to raise your hand and answer the question? Mr. Leung, please. Thank you, Chair. Let me try to answer this question based on what Pricewaterhouse has learned about this topic. We have been following this matter for a long time, and we have been following the development of the policy of the government for a long time. Well, recently, in Hong Kong, in Shenzhen, Shanghai, Beijing, we organize a lot of seminars, and we've invited industry participants to take part, and we explained to them the tax regime of the Hong Kong government, that is the current one. As I have said, for the Hong Kong government to take this step so as to promote aircraft leasing, when compared with other countries like Ireland or Singapore, when it comes to the actual tax rate, although depreciation is not to be offered, but then my understanding is that since depreciation is not to be offered, so the government is saying that, well, it doesn't mean that you should be expected to pay 100% for the rentals. It would not be fair. So we did some calculations, and we looked at different scenarios in relation to different levels of rentals. For our tax rate, in fact, it will be much, much lower than that in Singapore or in Ireland. We have observed that there is a lot of business in aircraft leasing in the market. This is because there's a lot of money in the market, especially in the mainland China, and we haven't got other businesses which are so good in terms of profit making. Therefore, aircraft leasing has become very attractive. So maybe a few years down the road, they may want to have the business listed. Probably that's the way out. So when it comes to the listing stage, when we have to look at the profit loss account, for Hong Kong to have this concessional regime, it will be much more attractive. As to what else Hong Kong can do so as to make aircraft leasing more prosperous, vibrant, well, in our submission, we have already mentioned amending the tax regime will be the first step, and we really hope that in future the government will work hand in hand with the aircraft leasing companies as well as the mainland Chinese aircraft lease lessors, so that there will be a brand new tax regime, so that they will know that the Hong Kong government is fully behind this move to promote aircraft leasing. Now, as I have mentioned, for the DTAs that we have concluded, when compared with other countries, maybe the number is relatively smaller. Let's hope that the Hong Kong government will conclude even more DTAs so that it will be facilitating the growth of the aircraft leasing business in Hong Kong. James, any other questions?
何生唔該你嚇。
喂，係多謝。飛機係非常昂貴嘅資產，所以咧產生嘅收入啊租金亦都非常高，所以咧對飛機租賃公司嚟講咧，營商環境裏邊嘅稅咧係非常重要嘅。根據現時嘅計算數字咧，就如果呢一個法案可以通過嘅話咧，就應該係比較呢個愛爾蘭同新加坡咧，香港係可能更有優勢。就所以咧對我哋嚟講咧，業界嚟講咧，可能係呢個第一步。另一點咧，想補充下咧，就係亦都係非常重要嘅咧，就係香港同其他國家咧係嗰個叫做雙邊稅務協議。 就因為嘅飛機個租賃嚟講呢，係有一個出租方，有個承租方。承租方呢，有好多國家呢需要支付一種叫做預提所得稅。咁呢啲嘅雙邊稅務協議呢，就係可以係處理呢啲嘅預提所得稅。香港下一步呢，就需要呢更加擴大香港嘅呢個預提所得稅呢個網絡。呢個呢係我相信呢香港政府可以下一步呢係繼續支持去做嘅。
係，仲有冇團體想回應㗎？舉一舉手啊！係，許生唔該你係。
我諗我就係呢個再響應或者就重複啦，就係我哋作為協會嘅角度嚟講啦，絕對認同頭先何生同埋梁生佢講，其中一點就係點樣盡快擴大香港同呢個其他國家之間嘅雙重避免呢個雙重徵稅協議，即係個 DTA。咁第一步我覺得即係相對可以比較容易啲做啦。其實香港政府已經做咗啦，譬如同香港同內地之間有一個 DTA 本來係7%到減到5%。咁但係呢一方面嚟講咧，當然係呢個就從個競爭角度嚟講咧，如果能夠將呢個再進一步去降低，我諗係呢個對個行業尤其面對內地市場嚟講係更加有利嘅。多謝主席。
唔該你，許生。仲有冇團體想有補充啊？陶議員，你仲冇問題？好，咁今日多謝晒各位團體嚟到呢一度嚟聽證會。如果你哋對政府即係將來有啲咩回應，有啲咩再跟進呢？其實我諗你可以直接同我哋嘅秘書講嘅嚇，或者你直接揾我亦都得嘅嚇。唔該晒各位，係今日。